It's great to be here. I'd like to thank Foodics and all of you for coming, for your attention, and I'm excited to introduce the topic of predictive analytics to you all. So prediction as a capability is the ultimate power for targeting marketing, product recommendations, in some cases workforce management optimization, financial risk optimization. All kinds of mass-scale operations and making improvements to them are served with prediction. But isn't prediction impossible? Like she was just joking, I'm going to know if you're going to lie, I'm going to know if you're going to die. These things generally can't be done with high accuracy, right? The only thing certain is uncertainty. The weather can only be predicted so many days in advance. Human behavior, no less challenging to predict. And those are the kinds of consumer behaviors, those are the kinds of prediction goals I'm going to be talking about. So with that sort of paradox or contradiction, how does a field that has the audacity to call itself predictive analytics establish credibility? So that's a credibility question I'll address partway through my presentation. So a couple slides about myself and my work. I'm the founder of the conference series Predictive Analytics World. We've got conferences in London and Germany every year, also one in Las Vegas coming next June. So you can check it out at predictiveanalyticsworld.com. I'm the executive editor of the Predictive Analytics Times. It's basically a news site, so for lots of content, including full-length videos from some of the sessions of prior conferences, accessible for free. That word, free. You can check it out at predictiveanalyticstimes.com. And I'm the author of the book that you just heard. I'm going to read the full title of the book again because actually the subtitle basically offers an informal definition of the field. So the full title is Predictive Analytics, the power to predict who will click, buy, lie, or die. So we'll come to a little bit more rigorous definition in a bit. Just an elevator pitch about this book. I'm a former academic, and this is a conceptually complete introduction used as a textbook at more than 35 universities. But it doesn't read like a textbook. It's more pop science, kind of entertaining, anecdotally driven, very accessible to all readers. And those of you already well-versed in the field of analytics will find advanced topics treated in the last 3 chapters. And then recently we launched a web series of which I'm the host, called The Dr. Data Show. So it's short, 10, 12-minute episodes introducing various topics about predictive analytics. You can check it out at thedrdatashow.com. And for those of you who tweet, I'm at Predict Analytic. So I'm going to introduce predictive analytics, describe what it is, how it drives value, and specifically with marketing. So the main places in the restaurant industry that are served by this application of machine learning, which I'll show is basically the same thing as predictive analytics for these kinds of business applications, are for targeting marketing, both for the acquisition of new customers and the retention of existing ongoing customers. Also product recommendations, and in some cases, workforce management, server management. I'll talk about how it works under the cover. So this is going to be a quick introduction, and then I have a breakout session this afternoon at 4:30. We'll have time to get a little bit more into it. Then I'm going to cover some marketing examples, and then we'll cover some examples in the restaurant industry, some cases that I've seen. So what's predictive analytics? Has anyone here heard of the American statistician Nate Silver? Anyone heard of Nate Silver? So in the United States, Nate Silver is the best known prognostic quant, the best known statistician or person of quantitative prediction. And he gained his notoriety by predicting correctly the outcome of the US presidential election in 2012 for each of the states. So the way the elections work in the US is that each of the 50 states basically chooses one of the 2 main candidates. So the vote is counted and tallied inside each state individually, and then that whole state essentially votes for one or the other. And each state has a number of points called electoral points that are sort of proportionate to its population. In any case, predicting for each one whether they'll vote for Obama or Romney in the case of 2012 was a great feat the statistician did correctly a priori before the election. Now, it was a little more difficult in 2016 when the election was between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. This was the last prediction made by Nate Silver right before the election, showing Hillary Clinton with a 71% versus Donald Trump with a lower 29% chance. A lot of people took this as meaning Hillary Clinton was definitely going to win. But this kind of goes back to my opening point, which is prediction's really hard. When you make a 71% confidence that things are going to go this way rather than that way, that doesn't mean they're definitely going to go this way. In fact, it's closer to a 50-50 toss-up than it is to a sure thing. So the real takeaway from that kind of prediction is a lack of confidence or a we don't know. We have a lot of uncertainty. In any case, this is sort of the best-known case of prediction with numbers in the US, but it's actually not predictive analytics, whereas what the Obama campaign did in 2012 was use predictive analytics. And this will be a nice way to introduce what it is and differentiate it from forecasting. So what Nate Silver does is forecasting for each individual state. This is the state of Ohio, one of the 50 states in the US. Nate Silver computed an overall prediction as to what's the probability this state will go for candidate 1 versus candidate 2. 2012 was Obama versus Romney. 2016, it was Clinton versus Donald Trump. Now, that's forecasting. You're making an overall estimate what's going to happen across this entire pool of voters, everyone who lives in that state. Whereas the Obama campaign analytics team was treating this as a marketing campaign. And to do that, they were rendering a predictive score for each individual voter, a probability of one behavior or the other to each individual within that state, and not predicting their behavior or outcome, whether they're going to vote blue or red, which in this case corresponds to Obama versus Romney in 2012. But actually, they used a more advanced form of predictive analytics, which predicted which of these individuals were actually influenceable, which ones could be persuaded to vote one way versus the other by way of knocking on the door or making a phone call by a campaign volunteer. So a political campaign really is just another kind of marketing campaign, and the volunteers are the sales force. So for targeting these kinds of outgoing contact, the knocks on the doors, the phone calls, same thing for direct mail contact. They're driving voting behavior. Same thing for driving commercial buying behavior. So in a nutshell, while Nate Silver competed in the US 2012 very publicly to win at forecasting the outcome of the election, and it was a very public stunt that he was doing because we saw him on every single TV talk show at the time. But at the same time, the Obama campaign analytics team was very quietly and unbeknownst to most of the public competing to win not at the prediction game, but to win the election itself, right? So which is more powerful? Predictive analytics, by virtue of that defining characteristic that you're making predictions for each individual, empowers an organization not just to predict the future, but to influence it by more effectively driving those per individual treatments, by rendering mass-scale operations more effective because each individual prediction corresponds to how that individual might be treated, should they be contacted, should they be retained as a customer, and these kinds of examples. So this has been getting lots of traction across industry sectors, so much so that people nowadays are calling data science, which is the broader field that this lies within, the sexiest job of the 21st century. And everyone's calling it that in the US, which I always thought was, and this started with a 2012 Harvard Business Review. I always thought that was kind of ironic. The article is written by these two authors. Tom Davenport actually wrote the foreword to my book, and DJ Patil was the first chief data scientist of the US. And I consider these two guys very handsome, but as far as sexiest profession, I don't know, I tried really hard. I put on a hard hat and dressed as a data miner for Halloween. Because, you know, those guys who wear hard hats are always the most popular socially. By the way, fire department actually uses predictive analytics, uses machine learning to decide which buildings should be inspected, which have the highest risk of a dangerous fire. And similarly, the big utility company in New York City, Con Edison, targets which manhole covers should be inspected, which have the highest risk of a dangerous incident like an explosion or a fire. So let's define this field, predictive analytics, that everyone's so excited about, a little bit more specifically, a little more formally. So predictive analytics is technology that learns from experience. And by experience, I mean data. So people oftentimes think data is boring. It sounds mundane. It's just a long bunch of ones and zeros. But when you're thinking that, you're forgetting or overlooking that data is actually an encoding of prior events. It's a long list of things that have happened. It encodes the collective experience of your organization, all the contacts with individual consumers, and whether the outcome was positive or negative, whether they bought more, whether they bought at all, whether they stopped buying. All these kinds of outcomes that you'd like to optimize, these is all essentially learning cases, learning experience. That's what data is, and it provides the fuel for prediction because this technology learns from it, analyzes it, number crunches it, in order to make these predictions per individual. So each individual gets a score, usually in the form of a probability, according to whether they're likely to click, buy, lie, or die, like in the title of my book, commit an act of fraud, cancel as an ongoing paying customer, any and all outcome or behavior that may be valuable for your organization to predict in order to render outgoing activity more effectively. For example, drive decisions of who should be contacted for marketing, right? That's one of the main examples, and I'll drill into that example a little bit more specifically. So just some buzzwords. Predictive analytics and machine learning for these types of business applications are basically synonymous. They refer to these types of methods: decision trees, neural networks, ensemble models. There's a long list of different methods, but they all are the things that do the number crunching and learn from the data. And this all fits under the broad umbrellas of big data and data science. These are kind of subjective words. They just mean let's do something smart with data, but sometimes they refer specifically to these methods. Those are the subsets. Older school term data mining, same thing. So in a nutshell, the data comes in from the left, and the core method, the predictive modeling method, or the machine learning method, whatever you want to call it, learns from that data to produce what I depict in these slides as a golden egg. That's the thing that's learned from the data, and that's the thing that's then used to render these predictions, one individual at a time, oftentimes an individual customer. So you take what you know about the customer on the left, one individual customer, you provide it as input to that model that was learned over the data, and now it outputs the predictive probability for whatever the outcome or behavior you're predicting with this project. So for example, in marketing, you're saying, hey, should I contact this individual today? Should I spend the cost of contact? What are the chances that if I do, the outcome will be positive and they'll buy our product? So as I opened, prediction is very difficult. There's a Nobel Prize-winning physicist named Niels Bohr, and he said prediction's very difficult, especially if it's about the future. That's a humorous quote, just so you know. And a very famous comedian in the United States, Jay Leno. How come you never see a headline like "Psychic wins the lottery," right? So prediction's hard. In general, we don't have a magic crystal ball, so we can't get high accuracy from this number crunching. But the bottom line, the simple fact that makes this valuable, is that you don't have to predict with high accuracy, you just need to predict better than guessing. It turns out that by predicting better than guessing, this is oftentimes more than sufficient to render mass-scale operations more effective and have a dramatic impact on the bottom line. So going back to this sort of one of the main standard marketing applications, which is targeting marketing, let's do a quick arithmetic example to show how much it improves. So first, let's do it without any machine learning, without the data number crunching. You're going to do direct mail to these 1 million customers. It's going to cost you $2 per contact to send them a sales brochure. And you're going to end up with, let's say, a 1% response rate. If you get 220 back as your revenue or profit for those that do respond, the 1%, well, the math is really simple. 1% is 10,000 of them. So for 10,000, you're going to get $220. So you're going to get 2.2 million. But you had to spend $2 million to contact all of them, right? Because there's 1 million of them, and it costs $2 each. So you spend 2, you get 2.2 back, so your bottom line profit is 0.2 million, $200,000. So the question is, how much better would it be? How much bigger would the profit be if we targeted more selectively by predicting those customers more likely to respond? So let's say we did a sample mailing to some random sample of, let's say, 50,000. And we collect that, we find out who does and doesn't respond, and now that's our training data. That's the learning examples. We do the number crunching over that data, produce that golden egg that produces the scores, and then apply it to the entire list of 1 million. And then list or order the customers from most likely to respond down to least. Now let's just take the top 25% most likely to respond if contacted according to the model. If the modeling method is doing well, if the data turns out to be valuable, we might end up with something like this, which is called a lift of 3. We've narrowed down the top 25% that are 3 times more likely to respond than average. That would be a 3% response rate versus the overall average of 1%. Well, if we use that to select and to now only market to the top 25%, right? So we've essentially made 1 million yes-no decisions. And now by only marketing to that top 25%, we save 75% of the marketing cost. We don't get all the business, but there's a much higher concentration of positive responses in that top 25%. So if we do the math again to that marketing campaign only over those 250,000, the same type of arithmetic I did a second ago, you'll find that the bottom line profit skyrockets by a factor of more than 5 to $1.15 million just based on more intelligently targeting, right? No new line of business, no new product, not even new marketing creatives. Just more intelligently deciding who should or shouldn't we should spend the $2 on to contact. Right? Such a dramatic difference that I actually paid my graphic designer, who I pay by the hour, to draw the star explosion thing so that it would be clear how exciting this is. On the other hand, this model totally stinks. That's a skunk. It's not accurate in the conventional sense in the word. We don't have high accuracy. Any one individual will definitely buy or respond if contacted. But there's no question that it has this value. It produces this improvement in profit. So we could consider this a skunk with bling. That would be like the alternative definition of predictive analytics. So I call this the prediction effect. A little prediction goes a long way. Predicting better than guessing, generally more than sufficient to render mass-scale operations more effective and drive improvements to the bottom line. So data is experience from which to learn. You learn what? You learn to predict. You can't predict accurately, but you can predict better than guessing, and that turns into this value. So let's talk for a second about how it works, what the data looks like a little bit, and then I'll get to some examples in the restaurant industry. So if you're looking at a customer today, you're saying, hey, I'd like to put odds on tomorrow. What's going to happen tomorrow? What's the outcome going to be? Well, what we do have is yesterday versus earlier today. We do know what happened earlier today. We know that yesterday we spent $2 to send the brochure, and earlier today we found out this customer had a positive outcome. They bought the product. So there we have the same relationship between 2 points of time, but they're both in the past. So that's a learning example from which to learn. and corresponds to one row of data. So everything on the left of the dotted line is what we knew back when we needed to make the decision about whether to contact them. The customer's male, lived in California, has made at least 10 purchases so far, et cetera. And then on the right of the dotted line is the outcome, the thing you want to predict. So it comes at a different point in time. They're both in the past. There's no prediction necessary. This is a learning case to produce that egg, the model, so that we can make predictions and apply it. It turns out that if you can get your data together into this form and format with many rows, typically one row per customer, that's half the battle. That's the challenge in the data preparation. That's the type of data you need to get together in order to apply machine learning or predictive modeling, whichever you want to call it. And when you do, you get these insights. So for example, Canadian Tire, that issues credit cards, looks at how the consumers spend with their credit card relative to whether they pay their credit card bills in a timely fashion. It turns out that if you're observed going to the dentist, you're a lower credit risk. You're more likely or less likely than average to miss repeated credit card bill payments. Similarly, if you buy the little felt pads that protect your floor from getting scratched by the bottom of your chair, same thing, you're a lower than average credit risk. People who like curly fries on Facebook are more intelligent. Men who skip breakfast have a higher rate of coronary heart disease in one study. Not necessarily because of the meal had a direct causal effect on the health, but because it's conjectured this is a proxy for lifestyle. If you're very busy running a high-stress, fast life, maybe you're more likely to skip breakfast, also more likely to be developing coronary heart disease. Certain neighborhoods of San Francisco, where I live actually, that exhibit a higher rate of crime also exhibit a higher demand for Uber rides, which Uber themselves published on a blog and then took it down off the blog. But since it's the internet, it's still out there, right? Now, they didn't think it was necessarily because the criminals are riding more in the Uber cars, but rather that that's as a proxy for non-residential population. In other words, those areas that have higher rate of crime are also the areas that have more people that don't actually live in that area, for whatever reason. So these things end up somehow being related. It's not necessarily causal. But whatever the reason is, I call this part the data effect, which is that data is always predictive. You can rest assured that when you get your data together into that form and format and do the analysis, you're going to find these links, these connections, these correlations in the data that serve as building blocks to build those golden egg models. And then when you go to deployment, just like I showed with the skunk example, you're getting all, I'm going to skip this for the moment. I'll come back to this if you come to my breakout. When you deploy it, you get this effect. So we see time and time again companies getting a great improvement. In this case, more examples from targeting marketing by using machine learning to target that marketing more effectively. So First Tennessee Bank in the U.S. lowered their direct mail cost by 20%, improving their return on investment of the marketing campaign by a factor of 600% return on investment of using machine learning. Target, which is a big retailer in the US, actually targets their marketing, and they improve direct mail by 15 to 20%. And Premier Bank Card, which is a major issuer of credit cards in the US, reduced their mailing costs by $12 million. So I'm going to run through a few examples of where I'm seeing this actually in the restaurant industry specifically, but it's still early on, so you know, we haven't seen a lot of public disclosure where it's actually naming the restaurant or line of industry business and describing the outcome in detail. But I'll show you the things that I've seen just to give a sense of it. Now, I'm going to provide to the conference organizers my slides, so you'll have access to a PDF of the slides that includes the notes section. And for slides like this, for many of the slides, there's additional link for more information about the example. So In this one, Intuit, which provides personal finance software, actually recommends restaurants based on personal financial data of individual consumers. Stacked Restaurants, and this is brand new. I just found out about this a few weeks ago. Will be presenting at our Predictive Analytics World Conference next June in Las Vegas, and this is the title of their talk, and I put the full session description in the notes, Why Machine Learning is Crucial for a High Transaction, Low Profit Industry. They're referring to the restaurant industry. I should be able to access the PowerPoint in a PDF form. If you reach out to me after the conference in June, I'd be glad to provide that. It should be of interest. Pizza Hut predicts customer purchases. OpenTable, which is a very common website you end up on in the US for making restaurant reservations, actually also does restaurant recommendations analytically. This is an article on food demand. A bunch of articles that you can access at your leisure on personalizations with restaurants. And I also, since I'm speaking to the restaurant industry, which I don't get to do very often, I have to brag for a minute. I have not seen a KFC public case regarding analytics, but I met Colonel Sanders in like 1976 or something. And that's me on the left and my sister on the right. It's real. This is real. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my mom for introducing me to the neighbors. This is at the neighbor's house across the street. New York University did a pretty interesting research project where it turned out that restaurant reviews are predictive of price changes in rent in areas of New York City. And restaurant reviews also are predictive of which restaurants might have health code violations, and that's actually used by the city of Boston and other cities in the US to decide which restaurants to inspect first, right? Just like inspecting buildings for fire and manhole covers for dangerous incidents, it's about triaging and putting things in order of the perceived risk in a data-driven manner. So let's take a step back. More generally, this kind of thing, we've mentioned restaurant recommendations. There's also product recommendations within the restaurant, right? Which side order to recommend to the individual consumer, which product or main entree in the first place, this kind of thing. So let's talk about that just for a second, and then I'm going to wrap up in a minute. But to just put perspective on this, from the consumer's point of view, being able to put an order on these massive number of things, different products to choose from, is an antidote to information overload. So all the search results you get online are generated, are ordered by the same underlying technology we're talking about, machine learning that learns from examples to try to order things as well as possible. So when you do a Google search, the order is based in part on a predictive model, based on which search results are most likely to be considered high quality or most relevant to you as the individual consumer. And then it turns out Facebook does very much the same thing. The order of the feed in your default news setting is also, they're trying to serve you the things that are going to keep your attention and interest the longest. Email filters that filter out spam, same thing. It's a predictive model generated by machine learning, and that they've basically resolved the spam problem compared to where it was, let's say, 15 years ago. And wait, there's more. When it comes to product recommendations, it's a very similar thing. So you can think of it as information overload. There's too many movies or TV shows to choose from. There's too many songs. There's too much content. How do you decide for that individual consumer which of these items they're going to like the most, right? So I have actually not seen public case studies of restaurants doing product recommendations, but I'm sure that they're doing it and that the public case studies are coming soon. But in any case, these are the most famous examples. Netflix recommends movies, Spotify and Pandora recommends music, Amazon recommends books and all kinds of products. That's where everyone does all their shopping in the US these days, is Amazon.com. Hopper predicts flight prices. Airbnb is a way to do home sharing. So when you do a search for an apartment or some unit that you want to rent, its order, just like a Google search or Facebook, is personalized for you of which of these properties are going to be most interesting to you. And then the online dating site Match.com actually spoke at our Predictive Analytics conference where they use this to match their users. So in a nutshell, all the sort of activity done to us as consumers is being optimized in this way with machine learning. Our experience in modern society is dictated by how we're treated and served by organizations. Their actions unto us, those treatment decisions, all these verbs. These aren't the things being predicted. These are the things being driven by predictions. So companies decide who to market to. Governments decide who to audit. Healthcare practitioners decide who to treat or who to test further. Financial institutions decide who to give a loan to or a credit card. So more and more, all these companies are essentially jumping on the bandwagon, and our experience is influenced by this every day because millions of decisions a day are actively driven by the output of machine learning, by these predictive probabilities to determine who to call, mail, approve, test, diagnose, warn, investigate, incarcerate, set up on a date, and medicate, which again rhymes. So I like to call predictive analytics the information age's latest evolutionary step, where we've moved from the engineering of bigger and bigger data, how to collect that data, manage it, maintain it, to the application of science, where we're learning from that data, its content, what it means, and what we're learning is how to predict in order to render more effective all the main large-scale activities that we do as organizations. So Harvard Business Review called machine learning the most important general-purpose technology of our era, and a very famous machine learning professor at Stanford named Andrew Ng has called it the new electricity. So in a nutshell, I've talked about how predictive analytics applies in so many different ways across industries. And it does this by learning from data. Data is experience. We learn from it how to make predictions per individual, and that's the defining characteristic that makes it so actionable, that gives us the power to render these large-scale operations more effective. And it works because of these two effects. It drives value because the data effect, data is always predictive, and the prediction effect, which is that a little prediction goes a long way in rendering these mass-scale operations more effective. So I'm going to cover a bit more. The other main marketing application is called Churn Modeling for targeting the retention of ongoing customers. I'll also take a look a little bit under the hood at what a predictive model looks like, some decision tree examples, a restaurant industry-specific case there. At the breakout session I have at 4:30. So I welcome you then and there with further questions, and I'll do a little talking and then a bunch of Q&A at that point. But thanks for your attention, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.